To every stroke survivor and brain-injured person out there, I know how it is. I wrote this book for you because I care about you, and I want you to discover that, even if you think you tried everything in your pursuit of recovery, so much more is possible. Why I wrote this book. The 2 strokes that I experienced changed everything. The beliefs I had of myself and the world were thrown upside down. For the better, I can say now. After hitting rock bottom, I went on a self-examination tour. I took a good look at myself. I did not like what I saw. Besides the visible aftermath of my strokes, I saw a sleepless workaholic that put too much value on extrinsic values. Following this realization, I decided that things had to change. I started reading and listening to hundreds of books and research papers. I compiled what I learned from reading into a trial and error toolbox. This toolbox, created mostly of new habits, allowed me to put theory into practice and helped to recover this far. Doctors consider me a medical miracle, and what I'm most proud of, I became a better person through the process. Most importantly, I want other stroke survivors to be part of this and help them through what I learned. This has been my biggest drive why I wrote this book. Oh, and a word of warning before you read on. The contents of this book reflect my thoughts. I am known to be direct, and I'm afraid I may use some strong words. Please do not take offense. If so, I apologize in advance. Introduction. We all have our own story. You are about to hear mine. What I am doing is very uncomfortable for me, since I'm an introvert. I am accustomed to only ever sharing superficial bits of my story, such as where I'm from, what I do, what my hobbies are, and the like. However, now you are getting the whole story from me. Authentic, bare, and completely vulnerable. Science supports everything I've written in this book, but it is not meant to be a research paper. It is more of a complete expression of my own struggle, as well as a bit of an operating manual about how I survived my 2 strokes and ultimately got my life back. I hope you will find helpful wisdom and practical advice with naked authenticity, along with some guidance concerning the emotional and physical stamina that helped me through my recovery. What I offer you, in addition to my story, is a sort of Cliff Notes version of all the books and research papers I've read in the past 3 years, plus my personal observations. My goal is to provide you with a plan for recovery from the bad cards you've been dealt, along with my suggestions on how to become a happier and more joyful individual again. Using my observations, I guide you through the stages of my stroke story. From my life as a businesswoman that had it all, to waking up in my version of hell, paralyzed on half of my body, unable to make a sound, and wearing a diaper. I was diagnosed with a severe stroke, and doctors doubted I would ever walk or utter a word again. They repeatedly told me that hardly any recovery would take place after the first 6 months. In this book, you'll read how I alleviated chronic pain and became able to walk normally, move my fingers, and even run again. And although it is not perfect at present, I also recovered my ability to speak. All of these things were accomplished after the initial 6 months. How was I able to recover as well as I have so far, despite all the naysayers? Once I got my overwhelming neuropathic pain under control, I made the conscious decision to ditch my victim mentality forever. Overcoming my pain not only freed up my energy, but also taught me the essential lesson that it is possible to rewire my own brain. I took control of my own biology and improved my body and mind. I became a biohacker. Anyone who views herself as an experimenter doesn't get upset when things don't go the way she wants. She merely collects more data, makes a note of it, and tries to apply that data differently next time. This is how I see myself now, as a somewhat obsessed experimenter biohacker. I will continue to try everything available, whether proven or experimental, to fully recover. My body and brain are now a running experiment on neuroplasticity. Before my stroke, I was always searching for something. I don't know what it was, perhaps wealth and status. But I'm not searching anymore. I have found my ikigai, a Japanese word meaning my reason for being. You'll hear about it in chapter 28. It is my sincere wish that you gain wisdom, practical advice, and most importantly, an abundance of hope from the pages of this book. If not, I think you'll still find it inspiring and even entertaining. I am determined not to screw up my second chance in life. I wouldn't change any of the things that I have learned in the past 3 years. Not a single thing. As a result of the events I am about to describe, I have become more aware, centered, happier, more appreciative of what life has to offer, and more authentic in my approach to life. Anything wise you read within these pages should be attributed to the authors of books and research papers on neuroscience, the experts on neuroplasticity, willpower, habits, health, and sleep, and to the writings of Stoic philosophers I have read. Any unwise assumptions can be taken as my error. If you are a stroke survivor, I urge you not to give up. There is a path to recovery. Take your steps in the right order, be patient, do not doubt, and become your new, better self. Stroke Rebel is my first book, but it will not be my last one. I'm going to keep you updated on my recovery. Chapter 1. Autobahn. It was near the end of summer 2016. I didn't care what day it was. I hardly slept for 3 consecutive days and the pain was overwhelming. The doctors diagnosed me with neuropathic pain, adding that there was little to nothing that they could do about it. It was up to the medication I was taking to deal with the pain, medication that did nothing to offer any relief. By that time, I didn't care much about anything anymore. It was as if my life had ground to a halt with very little meaning left to it. My sense of worth plummeted, and I felt terrible about myself and my situation. Those impressions lingered for quite a long time. I didn't see a single ray of light in the following days, months, or years for that matter. At some point later in time, I found myself walking down a paved road through the woods, if you could call it walking. I was holding a cane with 3 legs as I dragged myself toward my turnaround spot in a very painful slow motion. That day, though, was my end point. I was convinced of that. Since my left arm was paralyzed and I didn't have any real feeling in my left leg anymore, I had the cane in my right hand. It was like an extra limb to help me keep balance, but I could only move it 10 centimeters at a time. Any progress that I made movement-wise was excruciatingly slow and breathtakingly painful. It was a 450-meter walk to the viaduct, yet it felt like forever. Ironically, I couldn't keep myself from calculating how long it would take me to go 450 meters using a cane that took 30 seconds to move, 10 centimeters at a time. I stopped and thought about this for a little while, my brain struggling to calculate, divide, and multiply. In my normal state, this would have taken me 5 seconds, but now, all the numbers came streaming in as a strange, sluggish mix of German and Spanish. I can't do it, I thought. I can't do anything, and I'm a loser. It was getting dark by that time, and the wind blew so hard that my sweater fell off. I bowed down to fetch it, but fell to the ground. I tried to scream, but all that came out of my mouth was an unrecognizable mess of a sound. I sat there for a while, trying to move my numb left arm. It wouldn't move at all. "Damn it," I mumbled and closed my eyes. "Please take me out of this dream, out of this terrible nightmare." I didn't believe in God, but I was extremely angry with him. Then, just in case he did exist, I added, "What have I ever done to you? I'm a good person. Why didn't you just leave me in a wheelchair? I would have gotten the hint if that was supposed to be my wake-up call. I could have become a wheelchair tennis Olympic champion like Esther Vergeer, or even the next champion wheelchair ballroom dancer. I could have made something of my life by helping others, so why did you have to give me this unbearable pain? Why did you make me mute and lame too?" Then I thought to myself, it doesn't matter anymore now. I'm going to die anyway. I decided to try and get up by switching my leg and forcing my right leg under my body, pressing the cane back, holding it firmly, and moving my left leg in the correct position. It took ages, but finally, I got up. I ignored the sweater I left behind and started dragging my body toward the road again. While slowly stumbling forward, everything felt like a horror movie playing on a screen inside my head. How could I go from having it all to absolutely nothing in just a few months? I was a burden to my husband and kids. I couldn't even talk to them. Couldn't give them a word of advice or comfort. None of it was getting any better. Maybe this was a lesson that God or whoever wanted to teach me. Learning to be dependent on others? I don't think so, God. I didn't come this far in life to let that happen. I somehow managed to put on a sarcastic smile, but since my mouth drooped on the left side after my stroke, it must have looked like a very crooked smile. I heard the sound of something heading in my direction. Was that the old man coming to stop me and tell me it was all just a dream? Whoever he was walking fast, and I couldn't see his face at first. As he passed by, I saw that it was just my neighbor. He didn't even try to say hello. I didn't blame him. I hid my face, leaning against a tree, trying to catch my breath. At this point, I was also quite close to the viaduct. As I let my thoughts run loose in my mind, I was conflicted about whether or not I would throw myself onto the highway, without looking. The fall itself would undoubtedly kill me, but I didn't want to hit someone else's car and kill them too. I decided to watch for a clearing in the traffic below and wait until the right moment. Then, I heard something else, like a voice that couldn't have been there. I'm probably hallucinating, I thought. This time, I heard it out loud quite distinctly and turned around. There was a shadow approaching me, but I couldn't see who it was. I could just hear someone coming forward. As he came into view, I realized it was Martin, my son. The thought of seeing him immediately lifted my spirits, but I was confused by his sudden arrival. Nothing made any sense. I had left him and the rest of my family in the car some hours ago and watched them drive away. They must have turned around for some reason. "Mom, I'm hurt," Martin said. "Look." He was bleeding all over his outstretched hand. I was even more confused by what I was seeing, and my reactions were incredibly slow. I sat there, looking at him for a long time before I could summon the energy needed to put my arm around him. In the distance, the car was approaching, and we walked towards it together. We didn't say another word. I figured there would be time for me to make my move. The viaduct would always be there, patiently and unemotionally waiting for my return. Chapter 2. Stroke. This will work, I thought while I rolled over in bed and squeezed my husband's nostrils firmly. Shutting my eyes tightly against any light, I waited. Remco's eyes flew open, fluttered. He looked at me with a shocked expression. Then, as if nothing had happened, he shook his head, turned around slightly, and fell soundly asleep again. It was 2 a.m. I hated him when he snored. Lying there, my jaw clenched in frustration, I wondered why he couldn't just agree to get some help about it. I have a hard time falling asleep again when I'm jolted awake. My restless monkey mind took over whenever I woke up in the middle of the night, which I usually did. I began to plan my day and make mental lists of everything I had to accomplish in the next 18 hours. There was always so much to do. I usually began by taking Martin and Elle to the train since they headed to school at 6:50 in the morning. "Are you sure?" they would ask, rolling their eyes dramatically. They were both typical teens now, healthy, self-assured, and completely convinced they could handle an 11-kilometer bike ride to the train. I knew they could do the distance and get there on time, but it was the other commuters that worried me, especially on the 1-kilometer dike section of the ride. That part of the journey could be quite unsafe if a cyclist was not very visible to other drivers in the dark. "Besides, we're going with Femke," Martin continued. "Then I'll take her with us too," I replied. Femke was our next-door neighbor. Their usual comeback, "Why are you such an uber-protective mother?" Or, "You need to relax." I had a quick response to those remarks too. Oliver, Martin's best friend, had been hit by a car while riding his bike to school and missed an entire year of school afterward. Elle couldn't seem to help herself. "Everything turned out all right with him though, right?" She got me thinking, were they right? Was I a control freak? They were probably right, and I needed to let go a bit. They were 16 and 17 at the time. There was evidently no returning to sleep, so I thought about making their lunch. If I got up early, I would have enough time to make a quinoa salad with coriander and avocado. Elle would like that. Maybe I could take some to my office as well. I had 4 people working for me. The tough economic times were coming to an end, I hoped, since the financial crisis had taken a heavy toll on my company. The global financial downturn had started back in 2008 while I was pregnant with Madeline, our 3rd child. It still broke my heart to think about how I took her to the office a week after she was born so I could go back to work and breastfeed her at the same time. That felt like so long ago and foreign to me now. I was possibly a bit insane to do it. At that time, I was the owner of about 10 websites that specialized in electrical components. During the financial crisis, it was necessary to downsize from 12 to 4 employees and then find additional ways to save money. I bought a new 200 square meter office and rebuilt it to save on rent. I had also just launched an American website. The dollar was strong at the time, and I thought I would make use of that overseas turnover as well. Electrical components were high in profit margins since our customers were usually companies buying them in large quantities. That day, I needed to work on a specification file explaining to our programmers in Ukraine that I needed to downgrade Magento, the software I was using. As my to-do list grew in my head, I must have fallen asleep again. Then I heard snoring, 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 and I found myself waking up once more. As I came out of a deep sleep, I noticed it was difficult to open my eyes completely, but I did. I rolled over, shook Remco, then tried squeezing his nostrils again. He finally stopped. I felt myself trembling with agitation. Why couldn't he just go sleep in another room? We had talked about it several times before, but he refused to deal with it. He ended up saying, "I don't snore," and that I could always sleep in another room. That was true, but I never made the move despite the fragmented sleep. Instead, not sleeping well became an ongoing habit. I also knew I had a lot of other bad habits to work on, like drinking 5 or 6 glasses of wine a week, not working out enough, at least for my standards, and an addiction to light cola and coffee. But most of all, I needed to improve my sleeping schedule. I planned to tell Remco after dinner that day that he was going to be sleeping in another room until he solved his snoring problem. Snoring. 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 What? I was barely back into REM sleep when he woke me again. I bolted upright and sneered at him. Do you realize you've been waking me up about 3 times every night? I'm fed up with it. I'm going to the office since I can't sleep here anyway. The next thing I knew, I was putting on my clothes. I'm sorry, he said. Come and lie down. I'll cuddle you to sleep. I responded angrily. No, I won't. Every time I'm about to fall deeply asleep, your snoring wakes me up. I'm better off if I go get some work done. But when I come home, we're sleeping in separate bedrooms. I was furious. I intentionally made extra loud noises while brushing my teeth to piss him off. Then I looked at my watch and saw that it was 3:30. I went downstairs and grabbed a light cola from the fridge, and off I went. I was smart enough to avoid looking at myself in the large mirror downstairs. I must have looked horrible with those dark shadows under my eyes. There was no one on the street in Elton, the German town where we lived. It was a 10-minute drive to my Dutch office across the border in Scherensburg, and I loved taking the highway at that time of day. There were a few cars but no Neurlinks drivers, as my husband calls them. These were Dutch people. The NL on their license plate indicated that they were indeed from the Netherlands, who didn't seem to understand that the Autobahn had no speed limit. The Neurlinks drivers would drive in the left lane at 130 kilometers per hour, and Germans came roaring up behind them at 220. It was not a good match. I was pleased to see that there were no left drivers on this particular morning, so I hit the gas and sped up to 140, then 190 kilometers per hour. But I was so tired I didn't get the kick out of it that I usually did. When I reached my office building, I noticed that I must have forgotten to turn the lights off the previous day. When I tried to turn the key, the door was already open. I glanced over at the parking lot and saw Mariana's car. Was she here at 4 a.m.? When I walked upstairs, I saw her and smiled. She was sitting behind her desk, working on a Word file and translating emails into English. I'd given her that assignment because her mother came from the US and Mariana spoke excellent English. I couldn't sleep, she said, smiling. I smiled back. Do you have a snoring husband as well? No, she replied, but I couldn't sleep and I had to finish these documents anyway. The continual ringing of the phone during the day disrupts my flow. I nodded. She had initially come in temporarily to cover for a former employee that I had to let go. I like Mariana. She was 47 years old but looked a decade younger. Her husband was an entrepreneur, and I could tell she was used to hard work. That's why she was here diligently sitting here at 4 o'clock in the morning. I sat down behind my desk and picked back up the Word file I intended to send to the programmers in Ukraine. We each worked in silence until 8 o'clock when Sonia came in. She was the manager when I wasn't there, which didn't happen often. And she was the quiet type as well. No nonsense and never talked behind other people's backs. She was a hard worker too, like me. My respect for her was well earned during the 10 years that she had been working for me. We all continued to work, 3 quiet women, each to their own tasks. After a while, I decided to head downstairs for a bathroom break and get another light cola from the fridge. When I came back upstairs and put the Coke on my desk, I noticed I felt a bit strange. My leg felt tingly like it was half asleep. That's weird, I thought. I took a moment to try and stretch my leg out leaning on the table, but just as I began to extend my leg, I fell slumped down into my chair. Within seconds, I realized something was seriously wrong with me. My left arm was now unable to move. My left leg hung limply to the side. When I tried to say something to Sonia and Mariana, I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I sat there, unable to call out for help or move. They were a mere meters away, Sonia with her back to me and Mariana sitting 3 meters to my side. I was stuck in place, unable to make a sound, and my entire left side was in a contorted position. I was forced to sit and wait for them to turn around and see me in such a state of distress. It felt like hours, although it probably only took a few minutes. It was obviously before 9 a.m. because the phone hadn't begun to ring in the office yet. I waited and waited until Sonia's gaze shifted and she saw me first. "Are you all right?" When I didn't answer, Mariana looked up and gave Sonia a worried glance. They both walked over to me, gently laid a hand on top of my leg, and continued talking, but I was unable to answer. As calmly as possible, Mariana said, "Let's call Remco." His office was quite close to mine, and he was there within minutes. "It looks like a stroke," he said, remaining calm. "Let's call an ambulance." Mariana made the call for assistance. While she had them on the phone, she shouted at me to move my right arm, apparently getting instructions from the person on the other end of the phone. I was able to move my right arm. "Move your left arm." Nothing. She tried again. "Move your left arm." Nothing. "The ambulance is coming," she said after she hung up. They were there in 20 minutes. I remember them carrying me down the stairs and putting me into the ambulance. Then I blacked out. Chapter 3. The Neurologist. My eyes had been closed for most of the past hour, but I nevertheless noticed the movement of the ambulance as we traveled to the hospital. I also felt my body being transferred out onto a stretcher and wheeled down to the examination area. Soon after my arrival at the Slinglen Hospital emergency room, I was examined by a neurologist. She was a young brunette woman, probably in her late 20s or early 30s. The staff informed the doctor that they had already done a CT scan. They also told both my husband and the doctor that there was no evidence of bleeding or blood clotting. My body may have looked slumped and loose, but inside I felt rigid with anxiety. It seemed to me that this neurologist was my only hope just then. I knew I had to convince her something was seriously wrong. Trying to draw her attention over by staring at her quite intensely, she finally noticed what I was doing and came over to examine my limp arm and leg further. Using a calm tone of voice, she continued to talk to me throughout the examination, but I was unable to answer. My husband told me later that the neurologist concluded that I had suffered a TIA, transient ischemic attack. She probably had little to no experience with such a young woman having a stroke. As a result, the neurologist only did a further 5 minutes of examination and discussion before she left the room. I had an unexpectedly strong reaction when I saw her leaving and became frightened and panicked. I wanted to cry out, "Wait, Miss Neurologist, there is something seriously wrong with me." But no matter how hard I tried, nothing came out of my mouth. Instead of doing any further assessment, they moved me down the hall to a sort of common room. I was lying there in shock, silent, waiting. But for what? My 2 oldest children were there, along with my sister-in-law who had brought them to the hospital. My husband had also called my brother Thomas, an internist in Sweden. Again and again, I tried to get up but couldn't move. I tried to talk, but I couldn't. After waiting for who knows how long, I blacked out again. "Why are you keeping us waiting?" my husband yelled to a nurse in the hallway. "Get the doctors now." I was briefly conscious again after hearing his angry voice. I attempted to talk to him with no luck. "Do another scan now." My husband was frantically shouting orders to someone in the hallway. "She's having a stroke." I blacked out a 3rd time. The next time I woke up, a nurse was sticking a needle in my arm. I heard my husband say, "They finally got the blood thinners." By that time, it was past noon, and I had been there in the state of limbo for several hours. Those thoughts had just passed through my head when I blacked out again. Awakening to the sound of angry voices, my now red-faced husband was yelling at someone in the hall. "I'm going to take her to a hospital in Germany if you don't do another scan right now." His enraged words must have stirred them into action because I was taken away for an MRI scan soon after that. It had been 5.5 hours since I first came into the hospital. What they saw on the brain scan was shocking. A full third of my right brain hemisphere was dying due to lack of oxygen. An older, more senior doctor came to speak with Remco. They are going to transfer her to another hospital and remove the blood clot. If we hurry, there may be a chance that no further damage is done. The next thing I remember is being in an ambulance again, this time with a kind-faced paramedic sitting next to me. As he held my hand and spoke to me in a gentle voice, I cried for the first time in a long time.